Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I hope you had a nice lunch, and I want to say hello to all the people who are live streaming today back at Campbell Hall and elsewhere around the world. Hello. One of the things about being a dean that's fantastic is you not only get a chance to meet your students, obviously the faculty and staff, but you get to connect with your alumni. And that's been one of the joys of my job, is to be able to see the great work that our alumni have been doing. And there's nothing greater than to have them all come and be on a panel to share with what they've been doing, share with you all what they've been doing. And so I have that distinct pleasure today to meet with our alumni, to hear how they're tackling issues related to climate change, how they're addressing in their day-to-day work, what are the types of things they're grappling with on a day-to-day basis. And so they're going to share their insights, their knowledge, their stories with us about how do you really do it. And it's so wonderful to have you all. We are going to have our alumni that are talking about things from the material to territorial, from across architecture, landscape architecture, policy, and law. I want to introduce our panelists all at one time, and then I'll have them come up one by one to present. And then I will ask them some questions, and then we'll open it up to you all to ask questions. And we should have plenty of time for that. So we have DJ Gherkin with us. DJ is President and Executive Director of the Southern Environmental Law Center. DJ, you want to just wave your hand so people know? There you are. All right. We'll see you in a minute. John Kett, Managing Principal of Reed Hildebrand. John, welcome. Jeff Murphy, Founding Partner and Principal, MBB Architects. Jeff, great to see you. Serena Nelson, Associate at Nelson Bird Woltz Landscape Architects. Serena, great to see you. And then Mark Suramaki, Founding Partner and Principal at LTL Architects. So we're delighted to have you, and we look forward to seeing your presentations and having discussion. So, John, why don't you just get us kicked off?
Thanks, Malo. Good afternoon, everyone. I know we've got you right after the lunch hour here, so we'll try to be lively and keep you all awake. I know that's hard personally. I just want to say what an incredible series of panels this has been so far, and it's really every single one has tapped into a new line of inquiry around this, which just makes you recognize how many different ways into this subject matter there are. So as Malo said, I'm John Kett. I'm the Managing Principal of Reed Hildebrand. We're a landscape architecture practice of 70 plus landscape architects and administrative staff located in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and New Haven, Connecticut. I want to talk to you today about the many ways that this subject plays into our work, and then I want to focus in on one project in particular. Malo said the singular, my work. I want to be very clear, this is the work of 72 people in our practice. This is not my work that I'm presenting. But we're aware that there are issues throughout this session that come into play here. There are issues of equity and public health, like our work on the action plan at Franklin Park. There are issues of resilience amidst the extreme weather patterns and flooding events that we're seeing, like our work at Long Dock. There are more subtle and incremental impacts that we're seeing through our work on the Cambridge Urban Forest Plan in Boston, where you recognize that the impact of pests and disease, which are influenced by changing climates, as well as temperature shifts, make it difficult to maintain, much less grow, our urban canopy. There are issues of rising seas and preservation, which I'll talk about in more detail later here at the Tidal Basin in Washington, D.C. And then there are questions that came up yesterday from Sheila Crane about giving voice to centuries of colonial oppression and subjugation in Louisiana, where the relationship between slavery and incarceration and environmental justice become the context for a project that seeks to invert the traditional narrative of a plantation from that of a planter's home to one that's focused on the land and its stories at Live Oak Truth, Witness, and Justice. So as I mentioned, the project I want to talk about today is actually the work of my partners, Eric Kramer and Gary Hildebrand, as part of the Tidal Basin Ideas Lab. This was a collaboration between the National Trust for the National Mall, the National Trust for Historic Preservation, and the National Park Service. It was facilitated by SOM. 5 firms were invited: Susanna Drake, when she was at D-Land Studio, GGN, Reed Hildebrand, Field Operations, and Hood Design. This was an ideas competition. There was no project that came out of this, and so This group of close friends got into the room on the first day and said, hey, why would we compete? Let's jump on Suzanne Mumaw's bus and let's collaborate. What we recognize is that the reality, and that allowed us each to approach this through our own lens. We recognize that the reality is that this landscape is already experiencing the impacts of an evolving climate. Saltwater intrusion through the aging seawalls have already started to affect the cherry trees that are a critical part of our national identity and a symbol of our international relations. Given its proximity to the Potomac and to the influence of the Chesapeake Bay, just like CL was talking about yesterday in Apalachicola, this site will be an early indicator of the impact of sea level rise and increased flooding frequency. By 2050, projections show that the tidal basin, the Jefferson Memorial, the FDR Memorial, and the Martin Luther King Memorial will all experience frequent flooding and severe impacts from sea level rise and saltwater intrusion. We approach this through the lens of preservation. A lot of our work involves preservation, and when you first look at Section 106 of the National Historic Preservation Act, it sort of stumps you of how you address change at this scale. The federal requirements say that we have to seek ways to avoid, minimize, and mitigate any adverse effects. I think we all wish we knew how to do that. So we took a different approach on this and accepted the fact that this will continue to change. We started by an understanding of the tidal basin as a landscape that is not singular, it's not fixed, nor should it be. It's as much about the people who it represents, their actions and dreams, as the experiences that it affords, both collectively and individually. And it reflects many moments in time and many memories throughout time. We posit that this landscape has actually never been complete, and that regardless of the impacts being felt by a changing climate, it ultimately must remain forever an open and flexible work in progress. The tidal basin has been shaped by the tools of engineering and infrastructure in the name of beautification and park building, and for collective commemorization and memorialization. Today, that heritage is at risk. We see preservation as a layered strategy that includes reinforcement where feasible and effective, which is not everywhere, and migration where not. Recognizing the need for this landscape to continue to adapt and evolve well beyond the scope of our knowledge today, balancing preservation with a vision for continued progress forward. To facilitate this, we built the case that the tidal basin's landscape significance, unlike spelled out in the Secretary of the Interior's guidelines, which talks about things, elements, features of a site, the tidal basin was not about those features. It was really, in many ways, about the qualities and experiences, your relationship to water, your relationship to the L'Enfant grid, your relationship to the cherry trees and how you move through those spaces. The circulation network then becomes not a series of lines on the ground that are about paths, but a series of experiences that are held both individually by the single user and collectively as we all take those paths, either together or apart. So our question became, how do you maintain the qualities of this place while addressing the dynamic relationship between water and land, expanding ways that people engage with water, introducing prospects where these dynamics become visible, and ultimately creating a renewed landscape that feels both continuity with its past and asserts a new relationship with its future. Thank you.
I won't keep narrating these slides for John, if you want me to. Okay. Thanks so much, John. Amazing to see the work and really fantastic to be here and part of this panel and symposium today. My name is Mark Suramaki. I'm one of the principals of LTL Architects. We're located in New York City, And our work engages multiple aspects of environmental resiliency, from questions of sea level rise and its impacts on cities in a project for the Rising Currents program at the Museum of Modern Art back in 2010, to the restoration of Steeplechase Pier in Coney Island in the wake of Hurricane Sandy. But there's another aspect of our practice that I really want to focus on today that operates principally through research, publication, and representation, and this often takes the form of what we call manuals. And today I'm going to talk about the most recent of these publications, called the Manual of Biogenic House Sections, which engages questions of how we build and specifically what we build with in a moment of environmental crisis. This involves a shift from thinking about operational carbon to thinking about embodied carbon. And if we look at the next 30 years, we realize that half of the total carbon emissions of new construction around the planet will be embodied carbon. More if we think about the impacts of high-performance building. And the important part about that is that embodied carbon is upfront carbon. So whereas operational carbon accrues over the lifespan of the building over decades, embodied carbon is already expended at the time that the building kind of is built, which means that it's actually the more relevant, arguably, component to address if we're really looking at these urgent time spans that we need to avoid the most devastating impacts of climate change. So what can we do? We can build less and reuse more, and reuse is an incredibly important part of this embodied carbon question, but it's very unlikely that we're going to reuse our way out of this problem. By 2060, the world's projected to add about 2.5 trillion square feet of new construction. That's essentially doubling the building stock of the planet in 3 decades, and much of that in the global south, where reuse has more limited possibilities. So what does it mean? We believe it means that we have to radically and rapidly rethink the material basis of our architectures. We have to rethink and reassess the legacy of modernism with its reliance on concrete, steel, and glass, which are not only carbon intensive, but are also reliant on extractive methodologies that have devastating impacts on ecosystems, on landscapes, and inequitably distributed effects on human health and communities. So what are the alternatives? Well, one of the alternatives is to build as much as possible with biogenic and geogenic materials that are low carbon, or in the case of plants, actually sequester carbon within their very cell structure. The good news is that these materials are readily available. They're abundant, they're globally distributed, they usually require very minimal processing, they're inexpensive, and they're reintegratable into renewable cycles. And most importantly, they're available now. So for the last 4 years, we've been working on this publication, which we hope acts as a kind of a guide and a manual for how do we build with these materials, where do they come from, how are they processed, and how have they taken the form of innovative buildings in the context of houses from around the world. So why houses? In part because we know houses are a big part of the problem. We build too many of them, over 1 million single-family homes in North America alone every year. And so the very ubiquity of the house makes it a potent vehicle for transformations in our material economies. In North America, at least, our houses are too big, and with the exception of the wood frame, they're built almost entirely from petrochemical materials, which are not only problematic from a carbon standpoint, but also from a human health perspective. They're part of a take, make, trash linear cycle, which means that the majority of these ingredients or materials end up in the landfill at the end of the life cycle of the building. If we kind of zoom in on the wall of the house, we see one of the reasons for this, which is that the wall is comprised of multiple lightweight, thin, single-performing hygienic layers, which are based on a strict division between inside and outside. These layers are, again, largely synthetic. They're very difficult to pull apart and reprocess, and they're often working at cross purposes to one another. Biogenic and geogenic systems, by contrast, tend towards thickness, often integrating multivalent performance within a single monolithic mass. Often combining structure and skin, envelope and insulation within a single symbiotic assembly. We look in the book at 55 such assemblies culled from houses around the world. The book is divided into 9 material-based chapters, and a chapter on reuse. In each instance, we look at the carbon sequestering potential of the material, We draw the life cycle of the material from field to form and back again, repositioning the building not as a static artifact, but as a temporary accumulation of matter that has an origin and an afterlife that's tied to recursive cycles that are bound to natural systems. We draw the material and its transformation into a building component, and then in each of the cases of the 55 houses, we create detailed axonometrics and sectional perspectives that show the relationship between the material assembly and the spatial form of the building. We do this for straw, mass timber, bamboo, cork, and earth, both in its hand-compacted and digitally printed forms. And in each of these instances, we're really interested in the ways in which the encounter with the particular material drives the tectonic and spatial logics of the house. After 4 years of this research, we're now folding this back into our own practice and engaging in a series of projects that look at the architectural implications of plant-based materials. The first of these takes the form of 5 biogenic houses, a CLT house based on minimally processed CLT blanks that creates a contemporary version of an A-frame cabin, a bamboo lamella greenhouse enclosing an earthen dwelling, providing both an interstitial passively climatized buffer and a productive garden for the inhabitants, and 2 houses based on straw as mass, a hollow cube of straw bales and CLT modules that reinforce each other, the modules forming the rooms of the house, connected in a spiral from front door to roof, creating a house that's both thick and porous. And finally, a house that's based on 2 different methodologies of piling up jumbo straw bales, a corbelled wall, and a terraced interior landscape. And here, we're really interested kind of capturing the space of the house in between in the very question of thickness, and mass, which is often understood in negative terms of inefficiency, but here is exploited for its thermal and spatial benefits, underscoring the way that an encounter with biogenic materials can not only allow us to reevaluate architectural commonplaces, to invent new spatial possibilities, but also to reconceive of our buildings as inseparable from the material and natural cycles that give them form. Thank you.
That was amazing to witness. Thank you. It is an honor to be with you. I'm Serena Nelson with Nelson Bird Woltz, an associate in the New York office. We're a practice of 50 practitioners between Charlottesville, New York, a small office in Houston. And it's an honor to be with you and represent our work and our research-driven practice, the process of listening and how stories embedded in the land can offer clues to resilient climate strategies. From conservation agriculture to work with cultural institutions to public landscapes, our work provides opportunities to impact large-scale land management practices with major potential to change carbon dynamics and create resilience through design. Today I'll touch on 3 projects as examples of the work. The Georgia Tech campus, a living laboratory demonstrating the performative value of woodland ecosystems. Memorial Park in Houston, where restored prairie ecologies provide cultural experiences in the heart of an urban landscape. And Circle Bar Ranch, a large-scale agricultural parcel looking to shift the dynamics in southern pine agroforestry. The 8-acre eco-commons at Georgia Tech was transformed from a parking lot into a thriving Piedmont woodland landscape, with the site's topography reconstructed to recall historic natural patterns and drainage ways. Creating new open space supporting holistic sustainability initiatives from increasing biodiversity and stormwater management to providing new opportunities for education and social growth. This diagram illustrates the site's ecological performance value transitioning from a parking lot into an urban forest, providing carbon sequestration, air filtration, runoff mitigation, and accommodating more than 500,000 gallons of stormwater through infiltration and capture in cisterns for reuse. Oh, I'm so sorry. Oh my gosh. Okay, that's Georgia Tech. Let me go back. All right, let's start again. All right, so here's the 8-acre eco-commons transformed from a parking lot into a thriving Piedmont woodland landscape. And the new open space supporting sustainability initiatives from biodiversity to stormwater management and opportunities for education and social growth. Let's see, here we go. All right, this is the diagram that illustrates ecological performance value, transitioning from a parking lot into an urban forest, providing carbon sequestration, air filtration and runoff mitigation, and accommodating more than 500,000 gallons of stormwater. With over 20 on-site monitoring devices integrated into the landscape, Georgia Tech students and faculty were involved in planning for real-time data collection, integrating with current and future research happening on campus. Native plantings create varied and immersive site experience for students with places for outdoor education and experimentation. And as evidence of successful pollinator habitat, the bee boxes were actually a recent addition by students. Through research, we learned that the site was formerly the location of the Pickrick Diner, an all-white establishment that refused service to 3 black students from a local seminary, an incident that led to the first lawsuit upheld by the 1964 Civil Rights Act. Unity Plaza celebrates the bravery of George Willis Jr., Albert Lee Dunn, and Woodrow T. Lewis, the 3 students who bravely pushed forward into uncomfortable spaces to lead social change, and offers a space for continued dialogue, acknowledging that you can't have environmental justice without addressing social justice. Memorial Park, a 1,400-acre landscape, is one of the largest urban parks in the United States and Houston's largest wilderness area. NBW's 2015 framework plan focuses on restoring ecological systems, creating greater resiliency while reconnecting the park's land, waterways, and people, and was informed by more than 3,000 Houstonians who contributed to its development. The park suffered from vast tree canopy loss after hurricanes and drought, in addition to access challenges for both people and wildlife. The park was also bisected in 1955 by the construction of the 6-lane Memorial Drive and was built when it was built, and disrupting habitat and migration for dozens of species. Over time, site ecology had become homogenized, with many non-native species and vulnerable even-age forests lacking resilience to withstand increasing climate event pressures. The NBW plan resurrected historic prairies, proposed diverse ecological corridors to improve connectivity for animals, stormwater, and people. The first of several major implementation projects that have been completed since 2015, the Eastern Glades introduces a formal entrance to the park, reclaims 100 acres of previously inaccessible land at the park's edge, and creates a new lake with miles of trails offering immersive experiences of the surrounding ecology. The 5.5-acre Hines Lake not only provides habitat and a focal point of experience at this new moment of arrival, but acts as a reservoir for site irrigation, offsetting what was previously drawn from municipal water. With terraces and pathways surrounding the lake, providing opportunities for nature watching recreation reflection along the water's edge. Another major implementation project recently opened to the public, the Land Bridge and Prairie reconnects the divided park 67 years after the construction of the highway that bisected it. With over 500,000 cubic yards of soils harvested from on-site to cover the tunnels and create the mounds of the land bridge, and 45 acres of reconstructed coastal prairie habitat, the project serves as a triumph of green over gray infrastructure and will distinguish Memorial Park and Houston as an icon for a more resilient future. Lastly, Circle Bar Ranch is a conservation agriculture and camp framework plan recently completed that exemplifies the NBW process of deep cultural and ecological research leading to design. Oops. Sorry. A 2,800-acre former Angus cattle ranch and exotic game operation with much of its land in loblolly monoculture, we were asked to consider a camp and the best use of the land, but given the scale of the property, we looked to do something more impactful that could offer value to the larger region. Through research, 4 key narratives emerged that became inspirational for major land management and program initiatives. The history of the longleaf pine ecosystem, indigenously managed by fire and one of the most biodiverse ecotypes in the world, decimated across the Southeast by the destructive clearing practices at the turn of the century. This had given way to the present-day loblolly pine monoculture, agroforestry that dominates the region with low economic returns. Connected to this, we learned about the piney woods cattle, a 500-year-old breed evolved to graze the longleaf pine savanna understories that had been replaced by big beef European cattle. With a small contingent of local farmers working to restore the breed for meat and forest management. During the pandemic, we visited national forests where healthy longleaf pine ecosystems were being managed and conducted a forestry workshop to learn how our site could be used as a demonstration of restoration and landscape evolution from loblolly back to longleaf pine. We carefully studied our site soils and uncovered traces of historic longleaf plantations on the property as evidenced by mapped logging rail lines once used to extract huge timbers across the region. As steps toward becoming a learning landscape, we were able to plant demonstration blocks of longleaf pine seedlings, save 30 head of a heritage breed of piney woods, and brought to the site for exploration of both meat production and grazing for land management. The driving ambition for the camp centers around educating the next generation of land stewards, demonstrating integrated regenerative management practices in agroforestry, agriculture, and ecological restoration, moving from extractive practices that have decimated forests and farmland towards carbon sequestering, diversified forests, and healthy soils. The camp is intended to be a base not only for kids, but for on-site research, educational gatherings, and conservation demonstrations toward a broader community impact, with site hubs for respective programs and trail networks and circulations providing key moments of engagement. As a living model of regenerative management, the camp facilities are immersed in the forest, integrating ecological education and pilot forest conversions into everyday experience for campers. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Jeff Murphy, and Malo, I want to thank you for including me in this amazing program. And I also want to just say how inspired I've been in the past couple of days by all of the work I've seen. It's just incredible. And I'm really proud as an alum that you all are taking such an amazing leadership role in climate change. So thank you for that. This is my office. MBB is a 25-person firm in Manhattan. We're a women-owned firm, and we were started about 25 years ago. I started the firm with Mary Burnham and Harry Buttrick, my two partners. Our clients are mission-driven institutions and civic entities, and we work with all types of schools, universities, religious institutions, and nonprofit organizations. While we design high-performing new buildings, we have become expert at designing sustainable existing buildings. I'm sure you're familiar with the graph on the right. It's basically 40% of our emissions are coming from buildings, but the number to look at for my talk is the 27% of building operations, which is really an incredible number that's going towards emissions in this country. Oh, sorry. And then on the other side is a graph that basically just says that in 2040 of the buildings that exist then, 2/3 of them will be existing buildings. And so this really makes a case, I think, for we cannot address our existing building, the sustainability of our existing buildings if we're going to meet our decarbonation goals. St. Patrick's Cathedral is a project, the rejuvenation of the building is a project that we completed in 2019. The building's visited by over 9 million people a year, it's essentially this building was not touched for about 70 years, and there was all this deferred maintenance that basically we had to touch every surface inside and out, and also replace all the building systems. Our project at St. Patrick's Cathedral is atypical in that it's a historic building, but it typifies what we really need to be doing to decarbonize, and that is taking stock of our existing buildings, recognizing the value of their embodied energy and putting them on a more sustainable path for years to come. This is an image on the right of midnight mass at St. Patrick's Cathedral. And on Christmas Eve, and essentially we never shut down the cathedral. We did work for 4 years, never missed a mass, and never missed a religious celebration. In the middle of design, Pope Francis came out with his encyclic on environmental stewardship, and that was actually a great thing for us because we had tried to really push our client to embrace a sustainable agenda. And after the encyclic came out, they were all on board, and we ended up doing a very robust sustainable and resiliency program. You'll recognize on the left the Notre Dame fire in 2019 that originated in the attic above the nave, and the right image is the attic above the nave in St. Patrick's Cathedral, which we found unprotected. We knew that we had to ultimately develop an overall resiliency plan to address not only threats from fire, but from lightning, flooding, and terrorism. As part of our resiliency plan, misfire suppression system was installed in the attic. And this is a technology used from cruise ships, and it emits a fine mist right where the fire event is, and it would keep our ceiling from dropping to the floor, preventing, if we were to use a deluge system. After looking at a wide range of potential sustainable building systems, we landed on an all-electric HVAC system that is driven by a geothermal plant. This is a 240-ton system that cools the building and then also heats it. It's a standing column well system, open loop geothermal plant. While energy reduction, cost savings, and energy independence were reasons our client ultimately chose this system, this worked really well for our project in that there was no physical impact of the HVAC plant on the actual historic fabric of the building. We used existing pathways and infrastructure, which enabled us to carefully integrate vents, ductwork, and electric fan coil units into the architecture. And the image on the left here shows kind of the mess that was made by digging these wells along Fifth Avenue with Saks across the street and Rockefeller Center across the street. Everyone was ticked off, nobody was happy. Each well took about 3 weeks to drill, and it's a very noisy process, but we ended up getting it done, and the rest, I guess, is history. Substantial energy savings were realized by improving building envelope at doors and windows, and this included high performance glazing at stained glass up in the upper left, and contemporary bronze and glass doors glass enclosures that retained heat and air conditioning. We focused on elevating the human experience by making the cathedral more inclusive by doubling the occupancy count and, among other things, making the building fully accessible. Indoor air quality was increased significantly, and outdoor noise levels were reduced by 75%. We were able to reduce the visual clutter that had accumulated in the building over 150 years, and that helped us to enhance the architecture. This is an image after the completion of the second phase of the project, which happened to coincide with a visit by Pope Francis, who gave a mass at St. Patrick's Cathedral. It highlights the power of architecture to bring people together, but also speaks to the importance of treating existing buildings as if they will be around for decades, if not centuries. And we also need to provide the sticks and carrots to regular buildings to make sure that people decarbonize the existing buildings that are out there. I'm sorry. Boston architect Jean Caroon notes that there are over 350 billion square feet of existing building space in the United States. That space may be our most significant renewable resource. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am DJ Gherkin. I'm the Executive Director of the Southern Environmental Law Center, and I'll start by disclosing that I have two significant problems this afternoon. The first is I used to be a real lawyer, but now I'm an administrator, and so that means that I'm going to talk about the work of 115 legal and policy experts that I really, it's all over my pay grade. I'm just hanging on by my fingernails most of the day. My other problem is that I'm following these brilliant designers and their gorgeous representations of really smart solutions, and I just can't compete with that. We like to think we give good presentations at SELC, and I could show you some slides of nature and industrial pollution that would knock your socks off, but this is out of my league. So the first thing you learn in law school is if you can't win the game, change the rules. So I'm going to try a different approach. And I just want to give you an overview of my perspective as an environmental advocate, a graduate of the Masters of Planning program at the School of Architecture, on what I see as the interrelationship and the interdependency between our respective fields. And to do that, I've got to start by giving you just a little bit of perspective on what in the world we do at the Southern Environmental Law Center. If you don't know the organization, we're the largest environmental advocate focused on the South and one of the most robust environmental law nonprofits anywhere in the world. We use the skills of lawyers and policy experts combined with a deep and context-specific understanding of the South. We are of the South. To protect our region, but also to solve big national problems like environmental injustices and pertinent to today's conversation, climate change. What does that look like? We have energy lawyers working at every level of government to shape policies and market incentives to push fossil fuels off the grid and encourage an accelerated transition to a just renewable energy future. We've got transportation professionals and specialists who are creating the policy incentives that encourage the kind of walkable communities and multimodal transit opportunities that we're all working to build here. And we've got natural resources specialists protecting all that sequestered carbon all across the South. So that's our broad spectrum climate strategy. But we are also focused on protecting communities and habitats that are facing the inevitable changes. I did the same thing, I forgot one of my slides. The inevitable changes ahead with climate change. If the worst projections of sea level rise and temperature change are realized, the South is going to experience one of the largest human migrations in our nation's history. That's a significant threat. Some amount of this is going to happen no matter what, and so at SELC we are working to keep highways and homes out of the path of those rising seas and stormwater. We are making sure that our infrastructure and our communities and our laws are ready for the bigger and more impactful storms that are headed our way. And that's what we do every day. So back to the topic of the panel. What might not be obvious is how much the design professions interact with what we do. There's a lot of ways to think about what lawyers and environmental advocates are up to. I like to think, and what I tell my colleagues, is that we uncover the truth and we use it to tell powerful stories that persuade people to do the right thing at its most basic level. Well, knowing what the truth is and knowing what the right thing is these folks over here, right? It's the design profession, scientists and engineers, which means that in my profession, I get to impersonate highway engineers, architects, urban planners, scientists, and engineers, much to the chagrin of highway engineers, architects, urban planners over the course of my career. In one particularly entertaining excursion, I got to negotiate with landscape architects designing Tiger Woods' first North American golf course, complete redesign. I've never played the game, but how hard could it be, right? To take you to one concrete example of what this looks like, I want to talk about Charleston, South Carolina. Charleston is the poster child of sea level rise. The city is already experiencing what they call daylight flooding. That is flooding on clear days just from the operation of high tides. So if there's any place in America that you're going to look for a big infrastructure design-based solution to protect from the inevitable rise of seas, it's a densely populated historic city like Charleston. They sought help from the Army Corps of Engineers, a fine agency, but they did what engineers do, and they designed a big seawall. Now, the problem with seawalls is they will keep the sea level rise out. They also trap floodwaters in. So if it's in your entire solution, you have not solved your problem. It also turns out that they can't stop the seas from rising. They just displace it. In this case, models predicted onto a black community on the edge of town, which, as you know, we in our society have a deplorable history of displacing all the things we don't want onto. So we thought we could come up with a better solution. This is the sea level. This is the wall. And so, and by the way, I had to have at least one slide with green watercoloring just to try and keep up. We hired an architect to come up, a design firm to come up with a better solution, incorporating nature-based solutions to deal with stormwater runoff in town, creating natural spaces that people can enjoy, mitigating the effects to that neighboring community. And here's the point I want to make about this. This design costs less. It is more effective, and it is more beautiful. It is just better. And if you ask folks in the design profession, that's the path forward, right? It is coming as using our creative engine as a human society to come up with solutions across the spectrum of our economy that are more effective, cheaper, just more beautiful and better, so that people want to embrace them. We don't have to force them to with regulations. They perpetuate under their own momentum. That's what happened with solar energy, right? 15 years ago, folks in my field were pushing solar energy uphill, and now it is going downhill under its own momentum because it is the cheapest source of energy anywhere. That's where we want to get. But here's the thing. That's going to take a little while, right? We've been working on this for a long time. We're making enormous progress. In the meantime, my colleagues and I will be in the trenches trying to protect the things we have, trying to make the world a little bit less bad than it might otherwise have been. And so to the School of Architecture and to my friends in the design profession, I am really deeply grateful for all the work that you're all doing. I look forward to living in the world you're trying to build. And in the meantime, we're going to try and level the playing field for the solutions you're making by forcing bad actors to internalize the costs they are imposing on the rest of us. And telling powerful stories that get us all ready to embrace these great solutions. And so with that, I'm going to invite my panelists back up, and we're going to answer some questions. Thank you, everyone.